The house was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in when you're alone for a while, where every creak of the floorboards feels amplified, every gust of wind through the windows whispers secrets. It was just me. I'd planned for a peaceful night of nothingness, a rare indulgence in an otherwise busy life. That peace didn't last long. The knock at the door startled me. It wasn't loud or urgent, just a rhythmic tap-tap, almost as if the person on the other side hesitated. I paused for a moment, heart thudding as I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was late, not a time when visitors were common, but curiosity pushed me forward. When I opened the door, my cousin, Liam, stood there, hands shoved into his jacket pockets. His signature grin, the one that always bordered on cocky, greeted me, though his eyes held a hint of something deeper. Relief, maybe. Or was it something else? "Surprise," he said, his voice smooth but a little tired. "Liam?" I asked, bewildered. "What are you doing here?" "Thought I'd drop by," he shrugged. "Got a little restless at home." I stepped aside to let him in, the warmth of the house enveloping him as he crossed the threshold. Liam always had a way of turning any space into his own. He kicked off his shoes and slung his jacket over a chair like he'd been invited, even though this visit was unexpected. We exchanged the usual pleasantries, catching up on each other's lives. But there was something different about him tonight. His usual playful banter was subdued, replaced by quieter moments of observation. His eyes lingered on me a little too long, his silences heavy but not uncomfortable. It was as though he wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. The night wore on, and we settled into the living room. The dim glow of the lamp cast long shadows across the walls, and the only sound was the occasional crackle of the fireplace. Liam stretched out on the couch, his presence filling the room in a way that felt both familiar and foreign. "I forgot how quiet it gets here," he said, breaking the silence. "Yeah," I replied, my voice softer than usual. "It's peaceful, I guess." Liam turned to look at me, his gaze steady and probing. "You ever feel like the quiet makes you think too much?" I laughed nervously. "All the time." He didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Sometimes. I think it's the only time you figure out what you really want." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. I shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to say. Liam had always been the confident one, the person who seemed to know exactly who he was, but tonight there was a vulnerability in him that I didn't recognize. "Want something to drink?" I asked, desperate to break the tension. He nodded, and I hurried to the kitchen, grateful for the excuse to collect my thoughts. But even as I poured the drinks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting between us. Something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I carried the glasses back into the living room, the soft clinking of ice cubes breaking the silence. Liam looked up as I handed him a drink, his fingers brushing mine for just a moment too long. I ignored the flutter in my chest, chalking it up to my overactive imagination. "Thanks," he said, leaning back into the couch. The firelight danced across his face, casting flickering shadows that softened his sharp features. I sat down in the armchair opposite him, trying to maintain some distance. But Liam's gaze, steady and unwavering, made the space between us feel smaller. He swirled the liquid in his glass, his eyes studying me like he was seeing me for the first time. "You've changed," he said suddenly, his voice low but clear. I blinked. "What do you mean?" "Since the last time I saw you. You're different, calmer, maybe, or more confident." I laughed awkwardly. "I'm pretty sure I'm the same person." "No," he said, shaking his head. "You're not." His words settled over me like a weight, and for a moment I didn't know how to respond. Liam had always been observant, able to see through people in a way that was both impressive and unnerving, but the intensity in his voice tonight was new, like he was trying to tell me something without saying it outright. "Maybe it's just being back home," I said, trying to brush it off. "This place has a way of slowing you down." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Maybe. The conversation drifted to safer topics after that. School, work, the latest family gossip, but underneath it all I could feel the tension building. It was in the way Liam's gaze lingered on me, the way his voice softened when he spoke. It was in the silences that stretched just a little too long, thick with unspoken words. At some point I realized I'd stopped hearing what he was saying. I was too focused on the way his hand rested on his knee, the way his fingers tapped absent-mindedly against the glass in his other hand. The small, ordinary gestures felt magnified in the quiet of the room, drawing my attention in a way I couldn't explain. "Are you even listening to me?" Liam's voice broke through my thoughts, teasing but gentle. "Yeah," I said quickly, though I had no idea what he'd just said. His smirk told me he knew I was lying, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he leaned back, stretching his arms along the back of the couch. "You're hard to figure out sometimes, you know that," he said. "Me?" I asked, incredulous. "You're the one who shows up out of nowhere and acts like nothing's changed." He tilted his head, his smile fading. "Maybe I wanted to see if it had." The air between us shifted again, charged with something I couldn't name. I looked away, suddenly feeling exposed under his gaze. "I should probably clean up," I said, standing abruptly. I gathered the empty glasses and headed back to the kitchen, needing a moment to collect myself. As I rinsed the glasses, I felt Liam's presence behind me before he even spoke. His footsteps were quiet, but the weight of his presence filled the room. "You always do that," he said softly. "Do what?" I asked, keeping my back to him. "Run away when things get uncomfortable." I turned to face him, leaning against the counter for support. "I'm not running away, I just—" "Just what?" he interrupted, stepping closer. "You don't have to pretend with me, you know." His words caught me off guard, and for a moment I couldn't speak. The way he was looking at me, steady, unwavering, almost daring, made my heart race. I wanted to say something, anything to break the tension, but the words wouldn't come. Liam took another step closer, closing the distance between us. He was so close now that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, the faint scent of his cologne filling the space between us. "You're different," he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I can't stop noticing it." My pulse quickened, my breath catching in my throat. "Liam." He reached out, his fingers brushing against mine where they rested on the counter. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it sent a jolt through me that I couldn't ignore. I looked up at him, my chest tightening as his eyes searched mine. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice soft but firm. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and something else, something darker, something I didn't want to name. His hand moved to cup the side of my face, his thumb brushing lightly against my cheek. "You don't have to run," he said, his voice barely audible. The world seemed to slow down in that moment. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the steady rhythm of my heartbeat, loud in my ears. I felt frozen, caught between the urge to pull away and the undeniable pull toward him. And then he kissed me. It was tentative at first, a question rather than a statement. His lips were soft, warm, and impossibly close. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing even as my body responded instinctively. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late to pull back. For a second, everything seemed to stop. The air around us, the quiet hum of the house, even the wild beating of my own heart. Liam's lips pressed softly against mine, a gentle insistence that left no room for misunderstanding. His hand stayed cradling my face, as though afraid I might disappear if he let go. And for a moment, I wanted to melt into that touch, to let go of all the questions, the doubts, the fears that churned inside me. But my thoughts crashed back into focus, chaotic and overwhelming, pulling me out of the moment like a splash of cold water. I pulled back abruptly, breaking the kiss as I stared at him, wide-eyed and breathless. "Liam, what are you doing?" My voice was a whisper, shaky and unsure, but the weight of the question felt immense. He didn't flinch. His hand lingered near my face before falling back to his side. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, though there was no regret in his voice, only a calm sincerity. I couldn't help it. I stepped back, my mind racing as I tried to process what had just happened. This is insane. You can't just what?" he interrupted, his voice soft but steady. "Tell you how I feel. Show you?" The intensity in his gaze made my stomach twist. I wanted to deny it, to push him away, but the way he looked at me, raw, vulnerable, and unguarded, made it impossible to ignore. There was no mistaking the emotions in his eyes, the quiet desperation that mirrored something deep inside me I'd been too afraid to name. I don't know what you're talking about," I said weakly, though even I didn't believe the words. "Yes, you do," he said, taking a step closer. His voice softened, almost pleading. "You feel it too. I know you do." The silence between us stretched, heavy and suffocating. I opened my mouth to argue, to deny it, but the words refused to come. Because he was right. Somewhere deep down in the part of me I'd spent years burying, I did feel it. That pull, that unexplainable connection that had always been there between us but had only now come into focus. But that didn't make it okay. "This is wrong," I said, my voice barely audible. "You're my cousin." Liam let out a soft, humorless laugh, running a hand through his hair. "You think I don't know that? You think I haven't been telling myself the same thing every day?" His voice cracked slightly, the vulnerability breaking through his calm exterior. "But it doesn't change the way I feel." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. The logical part of my brain screamed at me to end this now, to push him away and walk out of the room. But my feet refused to move. My body betrayed me, drawn to him in a way that defied reason. "You're not thinking clearly," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. He stepped closer, his hand brushing lightly against mine. "I've never been more clear about anything," he said softly. "And I think you know that too." The warmth of his touch sent a jolt through me, and I felt my resolve wavering. I hated how easily he could unravel me, how his presence alone seemed to dismantle every wall I'd carefully constructed. My chest felt tight, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps as I struggled to keep my emotions in check. "Liam, we can't—" "Why not?" he interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "Who decides what's right or wrong? Them? The world? They don't know us. They don't know this." His words cut through me, leaving me raw and exposed, and before I could argue, before I could even think, he leaned in again, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was both softer and more deliberate this time. His hands slid to my waist, holding me gently but firmly as though he was afraid I might slip away. I should have stopped him. I should have pulled away. But I didn't. Instead, I let myself fall into the moment, surrendering to the emotions I'd spent so long trying to suppress. His kiss was intoxicating, overwhelming in its intensity, and I felt myself melting into him despite every rational thought screaming at me to stop. His hands moved slowly, tentatively, as though testing my boundaries. One slid up to my face, his fingers tangling in my hair, while the other rested on my lower back, pulling me closer. The warmth of his body against mine was electrifying, sending shivers down my spine as I clung to him, my own hands finding their way to his shoulders. Time seemed to blur, the world fading away until there was nothing but the two of us, caught in a moment that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Every touch, every whispered breath felt like a spark, igniting something inside me I didn't know I'd been missing. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathless, the silence that followed was deafening. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. I shouldn't have—" I started, but Liam cut me off. "Don't," he said softly. "Don't say it was a mistake." His words silenced me, and for a long moment we just stood there, staring at each other. His eyes searched mine, looking for something: validation, reassurance, anything that might make this moment feel less fragile. But I didn't know what to say, because the truth was, I didn't regret it. As much as I wanted to, as much as I knew I should, I couldn't bring myself to feel anything but an aching, bittersweet longing. "I don't know what this means," I said finally, my voice trembling. "Then let's figure it out," he replied, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "Together." His words lingered in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. I wanted to believe him, wanted to take the outstretched hand he was offering and let myself fall into whatever this was. But the weight of everything, the implications, the impossibility of it all, pressed down on me like a tidal wave. "Liam," I started, my voice cracking, "this isn't something we can just figure out." His expression softened, but he didn't move away. Instead, he took a step closer, his hands hovering near mine as though waiting for permission to close the distance. "Why not?" he asked, his voice gentle but insistent. "Who says we can't?" I let out a shaky breath, my chest tightening with the sheer intensity of the moment. "Because it's not normal," I said, the words feeling hollow even as I said them. "People don't—" I broke off, struggling to articulate the thoughts swirling in my mind. "People don't know us," he said quietly, cutting through my hesitation. "They don't know what this feels like." I looked away, my gaze falling to the floor as my thoughts raced. The logical part of me screamed that he was wrong, that this was dangerous and reckless. But the part of me that had surrendered to his kiss, the part that couldn't forget the warmth of his touch, wasn't so sure. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted finally, my voice barely audible. "You don't have to," he said softly. "We'll figure it out together." His words were like a lifeline, pulling me from the swirling chaos of my thoughts. I looked up at him, and the vulnerability in his eyes hit me like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just asking for a chance, he was laying everything on the line, putting himself at my mercy in a way I hadn't expected. I wanted to tell him no, to draw a line and put an end to this before it went any further. But when I opened my mouth, the words refused to come, because deep down, I didn't want to end it. Not yet. "I don't know what this means," I said again, my voice trembling. "I don't even know where to start." "Then don't," he said, stepping closer until there was barely an inch of space between us. "We don't have to define it. Not right now." I felt the warmth of his breath on my skin, the soft hum of his voice reverberating in the space between us. And before I could second-guess myself, I leaned into him, letting his presence anchor me in the storm of my emotions. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me close, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself breathe. The world outside faded, leaving only the quiet thrum of his heartbeat against mine and the steady rise and fall of his chest. "I'm scared," I whispered, the admission slipping out before I could stop it. "I know," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "Me too." We stayed like that for what felt like hours, wrapped in a silence that was both heavy and comforting. His hands moved slowly, tracing soothing patterns against my back, and I felt the tension in my body begin to unravel. When he finally pulled back, his gaze met mine, and the intensity there made my breath catch. "We don't have to figure everything out tonight," he said softly. "But can we stop pretending this doesn't mean something?" I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in as I searched for the courage to speak. "It does," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what it means yet, but it does." A small smile tugged at the corners of his lips, and the relief in his expression was palpable. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from my face, and I felt a shiver run through me at the tenderness of the gesture. "I don't want to lose you," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Not now. Not ever." "You won't," I said, surprising even myself with the conviction in my voice. The tension between us began to shift, softening into something warmer, something that felt a little less terrifying and a little more real. We didn't have all the answers, and the road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I felt like we were on the same page. He leaned down, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was softer, slower, and more deliberate than before. It wasn't about urgency or desperation this time. It was about something deeper, an acknowledgement of the connection we'd both been too afraid to name. When we pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, and the quiet intimacy of the moment made my chest ache. "We'll figure it out," he said again, his voice barely audible, and, for the first time, I believed him. The rest of the night passed in a blur of whispered conversations and quiet moments, each one drawing us closer together. By the time the first rays of sunlight filtered through the windows, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me, a tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way forward. But as we sat there, the weight of reality began to creep back in, and I knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still so many questions, so many obstacles to overcome, and yet, as I looked at Liam, his hand resting lightly on mine, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. "Whatever happens," he said softly, "we'll face it together." I nodded, the words sinking into my chest like a promise. Together. And in that moment, I knew that while the road ahead would be anything but simple, we had already taken the first step, and, for now, that was enough. The following morning arrived slowly, its golden light creeping into the room like a hesitant guest. I blinked against the brightness, disoriented for a moment before the events of the night before came rushing back. My heart sank and soared at the same time, an overwhelming mix of emotions I wasn't sure how to process. Liam was still asleep on the couch, his features softened by the glow of the morning sun. His hair was slightly messy, his arm draped carelessly over the side, and for a moment, he looked so peaceful that it was almost easy to forget the complexity of everything between us. Almost. I stood in the doorway watching him, the weight of the night before pressing down on me. There was no going back now, no undoing the kiss, the confessions, the way his touch had unraveled me in ways I hadn't thought possible. And yet, I couldn't shake the lingering question of what came next. The soft creak of the floorboards must have woken him because he stirred, his eyes fluttering open. When his gaze met mine, a sleepy smile spread across his face, warm and genuine. It made my chest tighten, a mix of comfort and fear warring inside me. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," I replied, my voice quieter than I intended. He sat up, running a hand through his hair as he studied me. The smile faded slightly, replaced by an expression I couldn't quite read. "You okay?" he asked, his tone careful. I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. "I don't know," I admitted finally. "I guess I'm still trying to make sense of everything." He nodded, his expression softening. "Me too." The honesty in his voice grounded me, and for a moment the weight of my thoughts felt a little lighter. I crossed the room, sitting down on the edge of the couch. The silence between us was heavy but not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that felt more like a shared understanding than a void. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Liam sighed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know I don't want to pretend this didn't happen." I nodded, my heart thudding in my chest. "Neither do I." The admission felt like a small victory, a crack in the wall I'd spent years building around myself, but it also brought with it a wave of uncertainty, a fear of what the future might hold. "What if?" I started, but Liam cut me off. "We'll figure it out," he said firmly, his hand covering mine. "Whatever it takes." His confidence steadied me, even as my mind raced with questions. Could we really do this? Could we navigate the complexities of what we'd started without losing ourselves, or each other, along the way? I looked down at our hands, the warmth of his touch grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. "It's not going to be easy," I said softly. "I know," he replied, "but nothing worth having ever is." His words lingered in the air, and for the first time I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could make this work. It wouldn't be simple, and it wouldn't be without its challenges, but the connection between us felt too strong to ignore. The rest of the morning passed quietly, the house filled with a strange, fragile peace. We moved through the motions of breakfast and conversation, but the weight of the unspoken hung over us like a shadow. And yet, there was a warmth in the silence between us, a quiet reassurance that we weren't alone in this. As Liam gathered his things to leave, the reality of his departure hit me harder than I expected. The house felt colder, emptier, without him in it, and I found myself dreading the moment the door would close behind him. He turned to me before stepping outside, his gaze steady and searching. "I meant what I said," he said softly. "We'll figure this out, together." I nodded, the lump in my throat making it impossible to speak. He leaned in, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to my forehead before stepping back. "Call me?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "Yeah," I managed to say, my voice trembling. And then he was gone, the sound of the door clicking shut echoing through the empty house. I stood there for a long time, staring at the space where he'd been, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. The silence was deafening, but it wasn't the same as before. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the absence of him, the weight of everything we'd left unresolved. And yet, beneath the uncertainty and fear, there was a quiet sense of hope, a fragile belief that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way through this. As I sank onto the couch, my mind replayed the moments we'd shared, the way his touch had felt, the way his words had resonated in the deepest parts of me. And for the first time, I allowed myself to hope that whatever came next, we would face it together. The journey ahead would be anything but simple, but in that moment, it didn't matter, because for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't facing it alone.